Welcome to Guest of the Year. I'm the host. My name's Mike. Today's setlist curator is Bob Bralove. Bob is a synth pioneer, sound designer, and longtime collaborator with legends like Stevie Wonder and, of course, the Grateful Dead. He also pushed sonic boundaries with Dos Hermanos alongside Tom Constantin. Bob's latest, Acoustic Conversations, which features him on piano alongside violinist Patti Weiss, is streaming everywhere now. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. Good to be here. It's an amazing game, competition. I'm amazed that anybody can do this.
That makes two of us, Bob. Here's how the game works. We'll play the first part of a Grateful Dead live track, and each contestant will use the messaging system to silently guess which year the performance is from. Contestants who are all in a video conference together can message in their guesses at any time during the clip or in the 10 seconds after it concludes. Whoever is furthest from the correct year is eliminated. The last two Deadheads standing will hear three tracks, and whoever is closest to correct years in aggregate wins. We've got our returning champ Corey here with us, and we'll meet the rest of the Deadheads in a moment, but first, without further ado, the Grateful Dead. The guesses are in. That was Space at Miami Arena on October 26th, 1989. Can you tell us why you chose that track in particular?
Well, I wanted a good flute and a little trumpet from Jerry, kind of because when I was starting to work with Jerry's rig, some of the crew told me, well, it's okay for the studio, but he'll never use it live. And here it was, blaring away. You know it's space because there's beam. You can hear the beam in the background. And so that was kind of a giveaway that it was space. And it was, it's later in the time when things were working. It just feels like it's a great space that they did in Miami. The conversations are really happening.
Bob, if you're at a barbecue and some guy was like, who knows nothing about music is like, hey, I heard you worked with the Grateful Dead. What did you do on stage with them? And you kind of want to get out of the conversation, but you also don't want to be rude. How do you explain it?
It was a lot of fun. So I started just designing rigs for everyone to play synths in one form or another and designing the sounds that they wanted to play. And then my role grew as I started working with them into producing on the records, They started, of course, the place to experiment where there's sort of no wrong notes was space. And so everybody was experimenting with my stuff during space. So that's when I thought, okay, let's make a record of space and drums. And then I asked each of the band members, can I do this? And they said, yeah, go ahead. And then I'd say, can I do anything I want? And they said, sure, try something. And so I made Infrared Roses, which comes from a lot of different shows cut together. So that introduced me into production. I was already producing with the band for in terms of the sonic quality. Then I started feeling that the theme kind of had a similar ending every time. So I started layering in these pads that I'd play. I had a position behind the drums, and I'd start playing these pads. And Mickey liked that, and so he because it allowed him to use different parts of the beam in response to what I was playing, and so the beam sections would have these slightly different characters. And I would get out of the way when the front lines came out for space because I didn't want to step on it. And I couldn't really see them. And then one day, as I was playing and sort of in this kind of groove with some of the drum sounds that I had a 48 input console just for electronic drums. And Phil would walk behind me. You know, they'd meet in Jerry's tent to discuss the next part of the set. And then he'd walk behind me and go, he picked up my headphone and screamed in my ear, "Keep playing." So I took that as some permission. And so I played those segues right into the space. And then, you know, as my relationships with everybody grew, I started writing songs. I, you know, wrote Way to Go Home, Picasso Moon, with Bobby, Easy Answers. I just saw a published version of Easy Answers, and it was like, wow, my name's there next to Neil Young and Bob Weir and Robert Hunter. And it's like, yeah.
When you're collaborating on a song like Picasso Moon, how do you remind yourself that you're there for a reason because you have someone to contribute and they value it, while also respecting this songwriting duo who's been working together for 20 years or at that point?
Well, Barlow was a big champion of mine. So he wanted me there. I remember I had this drum groove going in Bobby's studio, his home studio, and he was experimenting with different things. It was, you know, it was sounding good. And then he hit that ba-da-do-da-do-bum. I go, that's it. He goes, what? You know, he goes, what's that part you just played? That's it. Now, these guys are amazingly generous and giving. In the beginning, it could easily have been something that somebody would have in pop style music would have said, well, that's not a contribution. But Bobby felt that I had made a shift. I was there for the development of the song. He was doing something with the lyrics that were going back between them. And I could say, you know, well, I don't know, that the chorus seems like it needs to be expansive, not contractive. And maybe you need to open up the energy in the chorus. And he goes, okay, and changed that around. And it was like brilliant. So it certainly was Bob's generosity to include me, as it, you know, stars have prerogative in the music business. And I certainly appreciate that. To me, he is one of the great gentlemen of rock and roll. I'm so honored to have been able to be there.
It was a great pick. The closest was Zach, who guessed 1990. Zach is 32 from Syracuse, New York. Zach, how did you narrow it down to 90?
So I'm immediately thrown off because of how Bob introduced it by saying he was going to get out of the 85, 94 frame. And then I'm immediately hearing the MIDI Jerry flute tone. I'm like, okay, I'm recalibrating right away. It's definitely very clearly, I would say Tiger still. And then the clarity and tone of Bob's guitar.
You're on the next round, Zach. Nice pull. Corey is our returning champ. He's 28 from New Jersey. Corey gets 1991. He's on in the next round. Corey, why 91?
I started hearing the space of the recording, no pun intended, like the space of the venue, because clearly there was a lot of reverb and space for the music to travel.
Corey's on the next round. Joining him is Dave, who guessed 1992. Isaac got tripped up and guessed 73. I think I know what you were thinking, Isaac. Dave is 54 from Los Angeles. Why 92?
Well, first I thought we're going to ease into things with maybe Europe 72 or 77, but all of a sudden we're hearing the flute, and that could be anywhere for me, anywhere from 89 to 95, I think. I mean, if you can tell the difference between that, you're more of a lunatic deadhead than I am. So I just kind of went in the middle with 92.
Cool. Playing the game. Isaac, talk to us, 73.
Well, shouldn't be embarrassed to pick on you completely stumped me on that one, Bob. You are ruthless and amazing, but ruthless. Thanks for the chance, Mike, and I'm happy to stay along and see what goes on next.
Well, before you go, Isaac, how did you get into the Dead?
So I moved to Houston in 01, and before that, I had no idea. I was, my parents' music back in the day, and then a friend of mine showed me, I think it was Shakedown Street, and I was like, okay, cool. What is this band? And then he kind of stayed on some hits here and there, and then I just kind of dug deep. My first show was actually the Fare Thee Well shows in 2015. I've lucky to see Dead and Company, let's say 30 plus times, I would say. The Sphere last year, I take what I can get. I didn't choose when I was born. I was born in 88. So I'll take what I can get. I'm happy to Dead and Company and all the jam bands that like Jared and whatever that are fun to hear. But no, it's a big part of my life. It's just happiness, music, love. And just happy to be alive when this music is around.
Amen. Isaac, such a pleasure having you. Thanks for playing guest here. Corey, Zach, and Dave are on the next round. Let's hear Bob's second pick. That was a Dark Star at Harding Theater in San Francisco on November 7th, 1971. Bob, gorgeous Dark Star. Can you tell us about that one?
I was just listening, and it was a gorgeous Dark Star. It's great music. There's a lot of culture around the Grateful Dead, and I'm still learning about that. When I got the job, I had been working with Stevie Wonder, so I knew I could handle the road. I'd been, in 7-month tours and all that kind of stuff. And so that culture that was happening in the parking lots and was not part of what I thought was my responsibility or needed to understand. I had, the audience that I had was on stage. That was my focus, was to make those things happen and get a thumbs up from those guys. And that stayed very clear with me right through the end, that it was about working with and for them. So when when the band ended and the scene was exploding in another way culturally, and the music was moving all over the world, and seeing this, I thought, oh, I should catch up on this. This is really cool. And so that's when I became aware sort of the phenomenal thing. I mean, to me, these were fans, and, I was used to fans with Stevie, but they weren't this kind of dedicated fans. Though some of them were, some of them knew every note that he played. But the shows there was always a point in Stevie's shows where he would do whatever he wanted, usually solo piano, and there was, take it any direction. And he had a band that was amazing, that he could throw a tune out and everybody had it. But they were structured the same way every show. And those moments of inspiration and freedom were in a certain place. He had record hits that people were expecting to hear at least part of, even if in a medley, and not to go in and hear something different every night. And to realize that there's an audience for that and how huge and powerful and loving they are was mind-blowing for me. It took a while to sink in.
You said that you wanted to do a good job for the guys. I've heard people say that the guys wanted to do a good job for Jerry, and they were all trying to impress Jerry. Do you think that's accurate?
I think everyone wanted to please Jerry. He was clearly the pinnacle genius of the scene. You know, he jumped into all kinds of music independent of the Grateful Dead. Straight ahead jazz, wild jazz, folk. He was all over the place, always Jerry. And, you know, kind of the thing about being a musician, there is the craft that some people are amazing at, and he was. But there also is the art of it where you feel like, okay, I want people to know who it is by the way I play, not by hearing me talk, not by, you hear a couple of notes of Carlos and you know it's Carlos. It's the same thing with Jerry. It's just one or two notes and you go, hey, it's Jerry. Now, to have both those gifts of being able to play any style of music and convincingly, and no matter what style of music he's playing, to identify as Jerry, always being true to himself, puts him in this place where, what is it you like? What is it, everybody's asking, and also you were trying to create vehicles, whether it was songs or whether it was sounds or your part, whether it's a bass or a guitar or drums, that would allow Jerry to soar. If Jerry soared, the whole band could lift the entire arena up. And Jerry could bend one note and the whole arena would turn on its side and go, oh. and so how could you not want to please him? And he was a nice guy. You could talk to him about movies and this or that.
So he was like heliocentric socially as well.
Yeah. There were times he didn't want to be doing stuff or, talking about shit or whatever. But, on a day off in the middle of nowhere, you go to his room and watch a TV program with him. It was hysterical. He knew movies. So he could tell you background stuff or who this actor was and what they'd done and, just fun.
Thanks, Bob. These guys, who got it? Zach was closest, 1972. Again, way to go, Zach. Why 72?
The tones are usually what I'm going for. Jerry's clearly playing a Strat in that recording. I would say probably the Alligator, Graham Nash's guitar, before it has the sticker on it and stuff, kind of has the verb wetness on it that really is lending itself to 72, but you're 50 days away from it becoming that. So it's just that weird kind of similar thing to the last one, that the weird in-between periods of where they're towards the end of a tour or whatever, or figuring stuff out, where things are slowly moving into what they become.
Zach, are you a player?
Yes.
Yeah, you have to be.
Sound like it, yeah.
You have to be. Alligator, but before the sticker. That's crazy.
Well, yeah,
that is so
You're a lunatic.
finish
You're a
that
lunatic.
Graham Nash gifted him, and then it's that for however long until it becomes, you know what I mean? The Stratoblaster gets put in and the stickers on it, and then it's like, oh, it's the thing that you know what I mean? Your dreams are made of or whatever.
Corey and Dave both got 73, so everyone's on the next round. Corey, why 73?
So similar to Zach, the tone of Jerry's guitar cued me in that it was the early 70s. Now I don't know the equipment very well. I go more off how it sounds, and it sounded like they had went through the 72 tour and were kind of entering that jazzy phase that we see in 73 and 74. but I guess it was the opposite way, and it was before they entered the 72 phase. So
Nice. And Dave, 73.
Yeah. Obviously, that was early 70s. The best thing about it was I had that show on tape. I think it was like a radio broadcast. I remember the guy's voice, whoever that broadcaster was, had a great voice, like introducing the band. Yeah.
Yeah. Great sounding 71 tape. I see how that'd be confusing because it sounded so good.
It's like Keith Godchau's his first tour, I think, right?
He was an amazing player.
Did they talk about Keith?
Not much.
Yeah.
Not much. You know, I don't think that they wanted every keyboard player to be themselves. So to get that kind of referential to some other space that they were in, they knew they were, I mean, you know, it was a band of now.
Totally. Everyone's on the next round. Let's hear Bob's third pick. Playing the band at Delta Center in Salt Lake City on February 20th, 1995. Bob, incredible pick. Tell us about that playing in the band.
Well, the reason I picked that is it's Vince, right? So, and he plays that little riff at some point, right very soon, ba-da-da-da-da-da. And it was a riff I showed him. And he said, "Oh, that works for anything." And I said, "Yeah, it kind of works for anything." And I was always so thrilled when he used it. So as soon as I heard it, I go, yes, got to include that.
That's so cool. After Brent died, Jerry, either apocryphal or not, nixed the B3. And
Yes.
what kind of, so that's not apocryphal, it's true?
Oh, yeah, it's very true.
What kind of sonic opportunities and challenges did that give you?
Well, that was a huge challenge because everybody wanted a B3. We finally ended up with a Hammond electronic organ, which had all the drawbars, so Vinny could scope that, and an electronic Leslie that had several tempos of the swirl. And then I put it through, when he was finally happy and everyone had said it kind of worked, was when I put it through a guitar amp with distortion. So it had a little more bite that way. And it gave that, that older B3 distortion sound. The thing is, the digital distortions don't always really mimic the analog distortion. It's the nature of the sound. And there was a point that somebody was saying to me, a manufacturer, was that the analog distortion was based on second harmonics and the digital was based on third harmonics, really technical kinds of things. I don't know to how much that was true, but they certainly had different personalities. And it was a constant dialing it in, because parts, sometimes you played a part that was up and the distortion sounded one way and then, it was down and Vinny was not, Vinny was a keyboard player. So you weren't really, your amp wasn't a big piece of your rig. You know, he would go direct and come back. And then, you know, Jerry thought eventually to go with the remote amplification of his guitar tone. You know, that was going through a speaker emulator at the end. And I'm not sure that had the full bite of his, but that a lot of that was because we had gone to inner ear monitors, and the tones were coming through the microphones, and sort of Jerry in particular was feeling that it was messing up with how they harmonized. Because you would go to in your monitor, and you can place everybody in your stereo spectrum, so you know exactly who you're locking in with. It isn't coming out of one speaker. You know, you have a stereo field, and okay, you know, it doesn't matter where they are on stage. You can put them anywhere you want in your headphones.
Speaking of harmony, when Bruce was up there playing the grand piano, was it necessary to create a contrast between Vince and him? Did that affect your tuning of Vince at all?
It influenced, I think, Vince's choices of sounds. But even when Bruce was playing a lot, I had to be able to have Vince play without Bruce, because sometimes he wasn't there. And so everybody needed a piano sound. I mean, I remember when we were doing In the Dark, and I brought a piano module that I'd been using with Stevie into the studio, and everybody's eyes lit up. And Brent was, yeah, I want one of those. and so that set up this thing of setting up a standard for piano sounds that we evolved even to better sounding things than that as the technology improved. But it sort of set this standard that I had to meet of sound and tonality.
That was incredible playing, and the closest his run continues. Zach was closest, 1 year off, 94. Zach, talk us through it.
I really liked the October 1st, 94 Boston Garden Show, and I was listening to that not long ago. So again, guitar stuff, it's Rosebud, I think. So just the tone of the guitar is in that period. And like, I don't know if this is bad for me to say, you can hear Jerry's dexterity a little bit, the neuropathy or whatever. Maybe there's some things that are just happening, you know what I mean, that makes you think it's later. And just the way like Bob gets that like metallic tone that has grown over the years. I can't think, it's not a telly, but it's like that aluminum, full like silver aluminum telly he was using in 95. That's like it's a brash sound, for lack of a better word, but it's all finding your spot in the mix and things like that. So, but yeah, just tone stuff and just hearing what they're doing.
Cool, Zach. You're on to the finals. Joining you is Dave, who guessed 91. Our defending champ Corey guessed 86. Dave, you're on to the finals. Why 91?
Wow, I sure was out. I can't believe it. I thought I heard Bruce too, because there's keys everywhere, and I think that's the year he played with them the most. That's as good as I can do. These guys are so good that I had to like try to zero in on a day. I should choose 93, but wow.
Well, nice work, Dave. You're on the finals. Corey, 86.
So it was the keys that threw me off. At first, my gut was telling me to go with 93 because it sounded like a 90s show. And I know in particular, Vince starts playing the acoustic keys more in the later part of that 90s run. But then he switched to some sort of plinky sound effect that sounded very much like Brent. And at the last minute, I kind of threw out 86 because it sounded clean. It didn't sound like Brent's later sound, so I figured it was mid-run Brent, but I was far off.
Corey, it's been a total pleasure having you on, and congratulations.
Thank you, and I appreciate having me on the show and just the fact that you're up and doing this, and thanks for being here, Bob. It was great to hear your stories and meet a living legend.
Thank you. I'm just a schlepper.
And
Oh, wow.
one thing I want to point out before I go is it's the amount of humbleness, if that's the right word, that I see in the community is great. And I think it does stem from Jerry. You always hear the stories about how he just liked to play. He didn't like to be that icon with the fans. And I feel like a lot of us in this community do great things, and we don't give ourselves enough credit for it. Like your show, Mike, is, I'm sure, just a passion project. But for a lot of us, like, I know I kind of got in the quicker than these guys did, but they've been waiting 9 months to be on. Just seeing the all the love that comes out of it is fantastic. And Bob, your run with the Grateful Dead was nearly a decade, and you're not giving yourself enough credit for it. So it's just really amazing to see how humble people can be.
Thank you, Corey.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being a part of the show. So yeah, 3 tracks. Whoever is lowest in aggregate over the 3 tracks wins and continues on to next week. Let's hear Bob's first choice of the finals.
Been so long, felt this way, ain't no way. Rainbows in down that highway, oceans, breezes blow. My time coming, and voices say, and they're telling me where I'm going. Don't worry, now, don't worry. Ain't no way. Now, 'cause where we go. Don't worry, darling. Now.
The guesses are in. It was estimated profit at MSG on March 9th, 1981. Bob, going to the pre-Bob days again. Tell us about that estimated.
Well, I just love that tune. It's in 7 and yet rocks and funky. And I remember asking Brent, how do you keep that groove happening in 7? Because 7 is like, it keeps moving back and forth. The 1 is moved. It says, oh, you just count it as 8 and 6. And so it's a double, 14. And it's like, oh, that makes total sense. And so I just love that tune. And I thought, it's clearly tones that were before my time, that sort of short sustained electric piano sound that was the Yamaha he was playing. That's that sort of mini grand thing with you fed it these little strips of data to change the sounds. He was glad to get out of it, but he certainly made great use of that. Brent was such a phenomenal player. There was soul in every note that he played. And for me, I had positions behind everyone on the stage. I could wander anywhere and just check in on them and see what they were doing and how they were doing. So I had a little spot behind Brent's speakers, and I was just looking over his shoulder when I watch his hands, whenever everything was going well. So I just love that tune. I love Brent. He had his demons, but when they came out in his music, they were beautiful. I remember a conversation. I think we were working on The Devil I Know. That was Devil I Know is, of course, is Vinny. So I can't remember what the tune was, but it was Barlow and Brent. And, Brent was going through a rough time with stuff. And Barlow said, well, maybe you should talk about this stuff. You should express yourself. And Brent just looked up at him and said, what the fuck do you think I do for a living? So, he just had that. For me, when he did that blue-eyed soul vibe, it was just amazing. And what he could do on the organ and his keys. And he was able to amazingly create a presence of the keyboards that allowed you to see through it to all the guitars. You weren't, they would never blocked the images of whatever anybody else was doing. And it was such a fantastic choice of notes and delicate way to that was so perfectly Grateful Dead to me, is that, you know, you could see the notes, it was there, but everybody else was there too. The picture was always in focus. You know, you hear Brett like that and you go, okay, we got to use this.
Loss is a huge part of the Grateful Dead. And I'm wondering, how did they manage to continue on as they did?
Oh, it was tough. It was huge loss. But, you know, he was having trouble, you know, and everybody had a sense of that, you know, and he was on edge. And they had been through that before. I had never been through that before, where somebody I was working with just no longer was there. And all that emotional investment. But I think they had to reinvent themselves before. And as, you know, Dead and Company has shown us, they just know how to do it. They can process this pain and see what comes out the other side. But the idea of stopping was not really in their makeup. But they knew they had to process it, and they knew they were going to struggle. They understood that there was going to be a new way to sort of play, and there were going to be holes that had to be filled, and they were going to have to expand what they were doing. And I think they just know how to work and, you know, dig in and do what they need to do to get there. It's amazing. Certainly would have killed a lot of other bands.
Thank you, Bob. Both these guys guessed 1980. So they're both 1 year off. Dave, why 1980? Really nice pull.
I studied hard for this show, and I was concentrating on, like, when did Brent's keyboard go from that, like, hollow sound to more something else? So that was like, I almost wanted to guess 79, but that's too tough of a guess. I didn't have the courage to say 79, so I went with 80.
Zach, also 80.
I initially, I went 81, and I'm like, no, Bobby's voice is like, it starts to change or whatever to whenever he has to have that. I don't think the surgery is till the 90s, but he goes through these phases with his voice. And I'm like, his voice still has a lot of that, like, dead set clarity going on. So I was like, I'll just throw the dart at 1980. It's a phenomenal year for Grateful Dead. So, and it was sounding good.
Zach, how do you know so much about music and the Grateful Dead? How did you get into the band?
It's goofy to say. It's just like, I just love music and I love the Grateful Dead. I started playing music, bass, when I was like 13 years old, and kind of going through the typical Led Zeppelin, Beatles, Rolling Stones, all that type of classic rock stuff, and more contemporary 90s alternative things. And then having friends that were getting into the jazz world. And then it's like, what's the Grateful Dead? Like, what is this classic rock, contemporary, ahead of its time thing that's a jazz sensibility, but it's not like anything else? And the songs are to the point that Bob was making and what he was saying previously, how they find ways to reinvent themselves and keep pushing forward. It's like when the songs are that good, it kind of justifies itself at a certain point. You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know. To me, it's undeniable music. And then you go to a show and the communal thing opens your eyes up to so many different parts of life. And the more you listen to the music and have tragedies and wonderful things in your own life happen and travel around the country and life things happen, and your life is enriched by this music, and it's a reciprocal thing. And I don't know. It's kind of, I could literally go on for hours.
Keep going, man. Yeah, makes total sense to me.
Yeah. This is
Yeah. And,
I don't know.
and I got to say, the lyrics, it's just phenomenal.
Bob, Hunter titled your tracks on Infrared Roses.
Yes.
Who came up with the titles for Acoustic Conversations, which I've been jamming to for the last couple of weeks, and I really enjoy your collaboration with Patti Weiss. And I'm wondering how the project came to be and how the tracks were named.
Well, there are 3 covers. There's a Freddie Hubbard tune, Little Sunflower, which is established, Peace Peace by Bill Evans. And there is a improvisation based on an Eric Satie piece. And then the others, they didn't really get named till the end. It kept shifting. Of course, I get to name pieces with Dos Hermanos with Tom, and he's an amazingly quirky thinker, and it goes into great depth and knowledge about what he pulls on to name things. And so in that process, it's really just about kicking it back and forth with Patti. She's brilliant. She speaks 5 languages, is a neuroscientist, and an amazing violin player. So it really is about, for me, how does the music make me feel? That's the first thing. And you have freedom in instrumental music. This is all without my vocals. Probably the next record will be vocals. I'm actually working on a record of songs that David Gans is helping me produce. But so, you got to name it with some piece of the lyric in that kind of thing. But with, the opening track, which is called Lights in the Fog, made me feel like The Sunken Cathedral by Debussy, a prelude. And that's about Mont Saint-Michel with the water coming in and the island of Mont Saint-Michel being flooded and the cathedral being sunken under it. And it had that kind of exotic, misty thing. I'm in San Francisco. There's a lot of fog. And so the lights in the fog is looking out my window. It's not that complicated, but you know when it's wrong because the title gets in the way of your feeling about the music.
Yeah, feeling when something sounds right. Like, what is that feeling in your body? Just like an excitement?
Yeah, it's like it's that moment you wake up. It's like when the Grateful Dead play that thing that go, oh, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. For me, I'm a bright guy. I think too much. So I've had to learn that my intellect is a tool and not a destination. And so if I can learn that those feelings that make me, oh yeah, are the destination, then I enjoy the use of the tool instead of trying to think, oh, I've got this figured out right. Well, I'll never get it figured out right. I think too much. I'll keep chopping it up or, it's just like, okay, it has to serve something. My mind should be serving a greater cause. And music is that greater cause. And, we all know when we feel it. So it's important to keep your childlike wonder of that recognition, because that's the guide. It's not, what key is it in? What are the changes? They can be great changes, but if they don't make you feel anything, what's the point?
And be honest with yourself when you don't feel the feeling, because the mind will probably try to talk you into it. Like, this is the feeling. And you have to be like, no, this is not.
No, but that takes practice, I think.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Zach. Okay, so it's 1-1. Let's hear Bob's second choice of the finals. The guesses are in. It was Space at RFK in DC on June 14th, 1991.
I was there. Casey Jones bust out.
With the train whistle.
The train. That was with the train whistle.
That's cool.
It was with the whistle, and then we were blown away. Yeah.
What? Someone will have to tell me what during Casey Jones you played a whistle effect or something.
It was before, right? Before they went into it.
I think Mickey had an actual train whistle.
That's right.
And we literally like the pause to Jerry start the riff, and it's just like, burr, burr, it's amazing. Like, the loudest thing in Washington.
He strapped it on. It was so loud.
Yeah, the loudest thing. Probably,
it was right next. It was right next to me, and it's like, oh my god. I saw it. I put protectors on.
Bob, why did you choose that space in particular?
Again, it was really Jerry is playing a bassoon sample, and it was one of my favorite samples that he played because he really sounds like a bassoon. Now, when he plays it up high, it sounds more like an oboe. But with the double reeds, when you're writing it for an orchestra, it takes so much energy to make the sound, forcing the air through that double reed, that you have to write breath in there. You can write a long time with a clarinet or a flute, and they can hold the breath. But with bassoons and oboes, you can't. And there isn't any way that a real bassoon or oboe player could play what Jerry played. And so this sort of magic of having a bassoon play, just like, to me, that's always delighted me. So it was one of the reasons. And, it's also a lot of my stuff being used in that show.
So how did an effect go from being conceptualized to being played on stage? What was that process like?
I gave everybody new sounds every tour, and I gave them the ability to choose them and control them. I'd set it up like Jerry at this point would have 3 systems, each having a volume control pedals on each one. He could blend them, combine them, and he would pick them out on his guitar, as I recall. There would be a display pedal in front of the volume pedal, each one telling you which sound was on what. So I never had to be ready for a song. I had to be coming from Stevie, where you're doing pop song and you're trying to present the sounds from the record. You have a very specific goal for each song. Immediately on starting to work with the Grateful Dead, I realized this is not that. These guys need to be able to go from 0 volume to 100, and it has to be quiet, and they have to be in control of it. If I'm not giving them control, they're not going to be happy. So I knew immediately that the place I needed to start was to design systems that were customized for each player, and they should not cross. The information should not cross. By the end, I was thinking maybe it's time to cross. Maybe I should have a little central place where I didn't have to run around all the time, and I could just oversee everybody's sounds. But we never got there.
What was your role on stage during the show?
With Vinny, at the end, I was actually orchestrating. He had a Bralove pedal, and he would turn that on, and whatever I wanted song would be there. If he used it a lot, I know he liked it. If he didn't use it much, I might change it. And he would keep testing it, because we had that kind of relationship. But for everybody else, like the front line guys, they had to be, Bobby had his own thing. He was kind of very focused on what he was doing. He had a system for a while where he would raise a flag or something and wave it at me, and I would change something from the back. But that really didn't give him the kind of flexibility he needed. So he built into his guitar his own MIDI system that gave him a lot more freedom. And he was really amazing and how clearly he was thinking about it. But for everybody else, it was really about giving them control, understanding the way they talked about sound, which was very different. Phil would discuss sounds in a kind of an academic way that, I have some classical background, so I could understand that. Jerry would talk about it in very band, kind of like this band or that player or something like that. Mickey was screaming at me the whole show, I mean, it was just whatever he wanted, But, sometimes I wasn't available for him. But certainly during drums, he would be screaming whatever he wanted to be. But there would be times, I would design the sequences and the background sound. And there'd be times there'd be times he'd say, "Smoke this, so we're on the same page when I need you." And and other times he'd just look at me and say, "Surprise me." And I would, at one point we had these MIDI marimbas that were on there, and I would take Billy's and Mickey's marimbas and tape the notes, a little color tape on the notes I wanted them to play, so they could play scales that would be matching. And if I designed a sequence that had chord change, I'd use 2 different colors, so they could move back and forth between the scale or the pitches of the scales,
Wow. Is there any other Bob Bralove for any other band? Like, have you ever met someone who's like, "Oh, I do that for this band"?
Well, there are people who do sound design, and there are people who sequence. And, I'm lucky that we all got along well enough to grow into writing and producing and, understanding that there was, you have to know what they like and how to separate the wheat from the chaff and do it without much fuss. Everybody's got a lot on their plate. You want to make sure when you put something on their plate, it's something they're going to enjoy eating.
Man, that's so much to think about. Wow. Okay. Zach got it. 91. Nice poll, Zach.
Wow.
Tell us.
There with that one, there's less room sonically, for lack of a better. There's a little bit more going on, so we keep talking about Vince and Bruce and whether they're both there. They're undoubtedly both there. I don't know how much it happens at all. You know what I mean? 5 of them. I couldn't tell how much Phil was in that, but 5 of them are actively playing in space like that. So you have like a 55 show window that Bruce and Vinny are both playing together. So yeah.
That's a nice poll. And Dave, you're at the show, and that's the ultimate prize. And you were only 1 year off. Tell us about your 92 guess.
It's just a lack of confidence because just like Zach heard, Vince and Bruce were there. And that was, so just trying to protect myself. But nice work, Zach.
Dave, how did you get into the Dead, and how did you find yourself at that show in 1991?
Oh, wow. I like my earliest memories. I was like 1981. I was in summer camp with my friend Howie, who's still a lunatic deadhead to this day. A lot of deadhead stories as well. My friend had an older brother, and then it just goes from there. So Howie had an older brother who was a taper, and I remember him saying like he had a copy of Dead Set and Reckoning. It must have been the summer of 81. He's like, "David, you don't understand. This one's electric and this one's acoustic." And I'm like, what? What are you talking about, dude? Calm down. Then, of course, as I became a teenager, and then that's really when the Dead exploded. And, I went to college in Maryland. So that's how I went up. I saw a lot of shows at the Cap Center and RFK. That was an RFK show. And it's been the music that has accompanied my life. I've enjoyed it every minute.
Do you remember anything about that show in particular?
Well, that show, the Casey Jones, and then Zach reminded me of his like train whistle. I didn't remember it till he reminded me of it, but then it all just came flooding back. It was fun. I remember I was on the floor in the very back with some great friends that are still friends of mine today. We'll probably see each other at Dead & Company next week. Sit in the first level on the way back where there's room to dance. I have my eyes closed the whole time anyway.
Really? Eyes closed?
Of course. I'm listening to the music.
Did you keep your eyes closed at Grateful Dead shows?
Most of the time, yeah, I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool. What are you paying attention to?
I think a lot of deadheads have their eyes closed, wouldn't they?
I don't know.
I would also like cup my ears, like try to push my ears forward to hear the sound better. Like, oh my God.
That's so
Kidding.
cool. Okay. Zach has 1 point. Dave has 2. The idea is to be as low as possible. So Zach is up by 1 going into the third and possibly final song. All right, let's hear Bob's next pick. The guests are in with Ship of Fools at War Memorial on May 9th, 1977. Beautiful pick, Bob. The day after Barton Hall.
You know, time to give them some, something to figure out, you know.
Well, before we spoil it for these guys, and I spoil it for the audience and tell these guys what happened, Bob, we know how you got into the band The Grateful Dead, but I've read that you were a fan before you were a quasi member. What got you into the Grateful Dead, the band, initially?
My brother was going with his friends to a Grateful Dead show, my older brother, and he had a music competition. He was a clarinet player, and he had a music competition, and my parents said, "You cannot stay out late the night before." So he said, "Here, you go with my friend." And so I went with his friends, and it was high school. I was listening to Working Man's Dead and American Beauty, and I remember it was at the Capitol Theater in Portchester, and I remember being the only one of all of his friends who got up and danced. It's like, oh, they're not being moved, huh? And they liked the show, but it was very, look at these hippies, It's like, yeah, look at these hippies. I'm one of them. But then I never went to another show until I met. I kind of lost track of that. I was studying composition and analyzing Bach fugues and listening to a lot of Stravinsky and George Crumb and John Cage and doing all sorts of stuff like that. And then through computers, I was working at a software company to make enough money to get my master's degree in composition. And Stevie had one of the machines of this hardware company I was working for. And I asked the guy who was talking to Stevie's people if I could call him back. And he got me to talk to Stevie. I talked to Stevie and his people, and he invited me down. So I was working with Stevie, doing a Grammy show with Stevie and Herbie Hancock, Thomas Dolby, and Howard Jones, and met Merle Saunders. So Merle said, you want to do some TV show? You operate all these machines. I got a TV show, and I need some help. So I said, sure. Finished in Square Circle with Stevie. We had a break before doing a Japan tour. And I came up here, and Merle was talking about the Twilight Zone, CBS remake of the Twilight Zone. And so in doing that, I met the band. And when the band wasn't around, I was writing cues for the TV show. When the band was around, I was sampling stuff. And that Bralove had met me, and since I was high tech, he kept pushing. And we did a session at Bobby's studio, and the tune was called The Photon Bop.
But then I went off to Japan and I came back, did a few more things with Stevie. And then they were doing In the Dark. And everybody remembered that I had all these access to all these sounds and machines and I knew how to operate them. And they called me in to do the keyboard overdubs. So we did all of these sounds and things for In the Dark. And still, I was just getting, reacquainted with the band. I had lost touch with I didn't even know they were still operating. It was like, I see them in Billboard, top grossing band, on the road. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess people are still into it. And I think the moment that they kind of looked at each other and said, oh, maybe he has more to offer was Touch of Grey. We were doing stuff for Touch of Grey, and everything I was giving them exactly what they asked for. And the Brent had a part, and none of it was working. They were disappointed with everything. And I said, I've got an idea for a sound. So they said, okay, go ahead. They were pretty frustrated with it. Go ahead. So I came up with that little kind of calliope sound that opens the track with that Brent part. And he played it. He played it in one take. He played it perfectly. He picked up his head and looked at Jerry and they both said immediately at the same time, that's it. And the track was done. That was sort of my first push into maybe I could solve this. So then they, after working on that album, they said we're going to go and tour after this record is released with Dylan, and we would like to have the sounds that you created to play on the road. So would you like to facilitate that? So I did this sort of probationary road trip. And I had worked with Dylan before, so I was comfortable around him. And that all worked out. There's a lot of things that you have to be aware of and conscious of when you are on the road. There are a lot of temptations, and you have to be clear about why you're there and what your work is about. And that was not difficult for me because I spent 8 years with Stevie touring. And at this point, after a tour with Dylan, I knew who the Grateful Dead was again. Bobby invited me to a show at Kaiser. And that was the moment, I walked through the crowd to get to the backstage, and there were whippets everywhere. There was, all this kind of strange thing. And I'm going, I don't know about this band. I don't know, what is this scene, And then I was on stage, and they were doing a trucking, the elevation. And I said, I can work with this band. These guys have it. Definitely magic going on. So after that tour with Dylan, I showed up at the office. John Cutler, who was my friend, I said, because he was the engineer for the recording and we became friends. And he said, that my probation is over. I'm now officially not working for you guys anymore. He said, go to the meeting. So just the band in a little room in this Victorian in San Rafael, where everybody's on these really uncomfortable folding chairs. It was like amazing to me that we'd just done this amazing tour, and they're in this little room with the folding chairs. And I said, the probation is up. I'm having a great time, and I'd like to continue working with you guys. And so everybody in the band said, I'd like to work with you. I'd like to work with you. Yeah, I'd like to work with you. And we went through the whole band. And I'd been doing a lot of stuff with Mickey and the sampling for In the Dark and all that kind of stuff. So he was a given, we connected. And I finally got to Billy. He said, I'd like to work with you. And they looked at me and said, so hang out as long as you're having a good time. And that's the only job description I ever had. I kept coming back.
Hey, if you're having a good time, you know, what a good way to end. So these guys both got it, which means Zach wins. They both got 77. Dave, you're only 2 years off over 3 songs, and Zach beat you by only being 1 year off over 3 songs. Congrats, Zach. You're the new champ of Guest of the Year. Did you know it was 77 immediately?
Yeah, I was pretty fellow 77 right away. Yeah,
Nice.
it
And
was just
Dave,
right there.
Well, what a great way to end it with what my friends and I call peak week. You know, people talk about Barton Hall, best show. It might not even be the best show of the week. That helps with Franklin on 5/9. It's one of my favorites. Wow. I know that every lunatic deadhead listening to this episode knows that was a hard test. So I am very proud of myself. I never expected to make it this far, and very proud to lose to Zach, who definitely knows his stuff.
way to go, Zach.
Thanks, guys. A lot of fun. Privilege and an honor to speak with all you guys. The stories were incredible, Bob. That was really a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Bob's new album, Acoustic Conversations, is out. The link will be in the show notes. I can't recommend it enough. Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much for listening. For all the show links, including our YouTube channel, go to guesttheyear.net. And if you want to be contested on the show, sponsor the show, or make comments and ask questions, email us at info@guesttheyear.net. Shout out to Dylan and James and Jack for helping out behind the scenes. Thank you, Bob Bralove, for coming on. Again, Acoustic Conversations is streaming everywhere, and the link is in the bio. Thanks to the amazing tapers whose recordings made the show possible. Congratulations to Zach for getting the win and moving on to the next week. And to our other contestants, thanks for playing. And remember, it is all one song anyway.
And I bid you good night, good night, good night. And I bid you good night, good night, good night.